Button here. And with that, I'm going to turn us over to our host, Matt Wheeler, and let him educate for a little while.
Educate. Okay, so it's interesting because I've had like a lot of thoughts. In fact, I need to probably first start out by this, and this is going to sound so funny. I have people over time that will reach out to me on from the webinar. Like they'll send me an email or sometimes leave me a phone message. And I want to give a shout out because one, November was rough for me as far as scheduling. And so I didn't call because of Thanksgiving break and other different things that were going on. I didn't call someone back for it was probably like 2 weeks. And I feel terrible about that because for the longest time, I was always like within 24 hours. And so I called someone back and they were like, well, I'm actually just surprised you called. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do everything I can to connect and show up, even if I know that I can't help. I just want them to know that like, hey, I'm not ignoring you. Life's just busy for me at this time. And then I've gotten an email that I replied to, but then there was another email that went to it that I haven't. So I might pull up that email. We might go through that a little bit. And then I had a phone call from somebody, and no lie, it got garbled the only time they left their phone number. And so if you happen to live in the West Valley, and you want to reach out to me, if you're watching, I'm not ignoring you on purpose. I literally don't have your phone number. So please call me and I'm happy to try and help. But with that, I've honestly had a lot of thoughts. What would be best to share? And I know that the current population of people, I don't know how to say it, but the people probably watching this webinar have had recent discovery and they're in a lot of hurt and pain. But I actually had a couple I was working with recently who kind of said to me like along the lines of like, we're coming up on the first anniversary of kind of everything being opened up. And when I tell people that when they're walking through grief, like your first year, everything is your first, right? This is my first birthday since discovery. This is my first anniversary. This is my first Christmas since discovery, like whatever it might be. And so that can be really hard in and of itself. So a lot of times getting to that first year and getting past that first year can be helpful because we've at least experienced everything once, if that makes any sense. And in talking with this couple, they happen to have, for the most part, sobriety. And if there's been relapses, they've been handled appropriately, or I should say slips, they've been handled appropriately and checked in. And so, but the conversation kind of led to like, what do we do like around this first anniversary? And I told them that every couple's different, right? Like some couples I've had say, we're going to renew our vows and like kind of have this start over. I've had other couples like get a tattoo together and I'm like, okay, like whatever your thing. Right. And sometimes it's, hey, instead of Discovery Day, or D-Day being like this, hey, let's remember how awful it was. What about going on a hike that is like, look, we're going to go on a hike. It's really important for the person who is struggling with addiction to honor their partner's hurt and pain. Like, hey, I know that I've hurt you and I want to honor the pain that you've had to go through and that I don't fully even understand yet as we continue to walk through this. And like, let's go on a hike. And when we're on the hike, let's talk about our future together. Let's talk about the proverbial steps that we've taken to climb this mountain together. Something like that, so that we can create new memories around a very painful date and time. And and I know that this may not be an easy thing to talk about, because we probably have people on the webinar who are like, oh my gosh, what it would be like to be past a year. I'm just trying to get through today. And I honor that, and I hear that. But it just made me think, one, the person struggling with addiction needs to learn how to honor and hold the space of the pain of the partner. And at the same time, what are some things that we can do together to show that we're doing our best to move past it, even though we're not giving that message of, when are you going to get over it, right? Because you know what? It's going to take as long as it needs to take. So let it take as long as it's going to take, but try to figure out some way to show that we're moving past, or moving forward, I should say. It's not so much moving past, but moving forward. And then the other thing that really popped into my head was, I think it was important for me in my own healing journey to realize that the trauma didn't define me. And sometimes it's hard to not define ourselves through the trauma. I had a friend who I was discussing this with who had said to me, we start out being victims, which is true. We've been victimized. And then we need to move to where we become survivors. And then eventually we move to a space where we are a thriver. Now, my way of thriving is in part by being a clinician and helping other people heal. It's being a friend and helping friends heal. It's being a patient listener. My way of being a thriver, in part, is that the trauma and the abuse that happened to me doesn't define who I am anymore. I don't identify myself as a victim. I don't identify myself as a trauma. Like, I identify myself as a trauma survivor, but not specifically that type of trauma. Like, and I don't introduce, when I talk to somebody on a plane, I don't say, hey, I'm Matt, I'm a trauma survivor, right? I'm Matt, I'm a good husband and a kind father, and I'm silly, and I guess I identify myself in part by socks. But so in this process of healing, we're trying to figure out, how do I create that new identity? Who is it that I am? Who is it that I want to become? How do I become a powerful spouse and a powerful individual, rather than a victim of addiction? Or how do I not take on the identity that I'm an addict? I am just an addict. I'm a dirty addict, and I'm always going to be an addict, right? How do I take on the identity that I'm a good, loving human being who's learning how to increase and be positive in my relationships? So that's kind of what I'm going to throw out on the educational piece. I imagine you have lots of questions, Scott.
I certainly do have a couple. Everybody type your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to them. It's, first of all, does this apply to all grief and trauma, or just betrayal? It seems to me that it probably applies to everything. Like reclaiming your
Oh, what'd you say?
said you're chewing. I just finished a bowl of cereal.
Oh, I love it. No, like, so one of the things that I said, I was like, hey, Scott, I'm going to be back, because today was wild and I loved all my sessions today, but I didn't have time to grab my lunch. And so I threw my lunch, and I'm like, I'm going to eat in between you and I talking. I love that you asked that question. I think, to be honest, I think it's anything, right? Like, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite friends, basketball is his life. And he like identifies as this like basketball player, and like playing basketball, he injured his shoulder. And when he injured his shoulder, he literally was out of commission. He could not play. I think he had to have some surgery on it or whatever, and he couldn't play for an extended period of time. And it caused like this depressive state for him because of how, dare I say, over-identified he was in his life. I think all of us, like, I also identify, as you can see in the picture behind me, as a cyclist, right? Like, I love cycling. I love running. I love exercise. But man, it would be a blow to me if I was paralyzed or sick, or I would have to be careful that it wouldn't send me into a really bad place because of my over identification. And so I think when trauma happens to us, betrayal happens to us, especially if we identify ourselves as a loving spouse and a caring spouse and a good partner and a faithful partner, and we find out that our partner betrays us, I mean, that is such a blow to the identity, rightfully so, that it takes work for us to realize I am more than just a faithful, loving spouse. I am more than just a committed partner. Even though I'm still committed, the betrayal that I received doesn't define me. So I think it applies in so many areas of our lives that we need to be careful not to over-identify in one area or another. I've seen people go through major faith crisis because they've over-identified themselves even within their own faith, or within 12-step or whatever it might be, that when they have any sort of an issue or conflict there that they're struggling to work through, it can be a major blow to the psyche. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it probably applies even when you don't over-identify. But, my mother, I just lost my father in August. So my mother lost her husband of 59 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been so this is the first everything, without him. So instead of doing the usual Thanksgiving, we all flew to Florida, and and we had lobster on Thanksgiving instead.
Oh, totally.
And we scattered his ashes in the ocean, and it made Thanksgiving bearable for her because we did it differently. We I use the word reclaim the day, honor the hurt and pain, which we did, but create new memories, which we did. And she's flying out here for Christmas, and Christmas was the big one for her. Always Christmas Eve was at her house, Christmas morning at my sister's, and, this tradition that's been going on for decades. And so she's flying out here this year for 9 days, which is a little much. Yeah. But we're going to reclaim Christmas Day. We're going to have the brunch that we always have on Christmas Day, but we're going to have it at my house, and I'm inviting some, friends over, and we'll take some time to honor her pain, but we're creating some new memories. And, maybe I'll see if she wants to get a tattoo. Well, to honor the Christmas Day tattoos. Woo! I don't think she's going to go for it.
I mean, hey, it's amazing how I've seen something like that unite people. And if that helps us move on and heal, I guess that's up to you to figure out. But right. I mean, whether it's we get a piece of jewelry that we all share that represents this thing. I mean, it sounds funny, but we really just need to find ways to connect and move forward.
Yeah. And I've talked to it. I can't remember whether it was you or John Taylor, but about couples needing to reclaim their favorite restaurant because, he also took his affair partner there or something. Reclaim the beach house or finding ways to take it back and make it the couples again instead of where he or she cheated. Do you see couples dealing with places even that they have to do this?
Oh, absolutely. And it is, I mean, think about it. You have to reclaim your own marriage. You have to reclaim your own.
Sometimes you have to reclaim your own bedroom. Yeah,
your own bedroom, your own fidelity, your own sexuality within your marriage, so there really is this reclamation. I don't know how to say it. Anyway, there really is of everything, right? Because if our favorite restaurant is still going to be our favorite restaurant, we have to go back and make it ours. And it's kind of tough because I encourage people to go figure that process out, and I can throw out some ideas, but the truth is I don't know how to make that happen for each person, right? We actually have to go and experiment. We've got to go try it. Now, part of that is we've got to go be vulnerable. That's a scary thing to do because I got to go back there, wherever it might be, and be vulnerable and open myself up to hurt and pain and rejection and loss. And so it's kind of an ugly process that has a beautiful outcome or can have a beautiful outcome.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, let's jump into the Q&A feature. So type some questions into the Q&A. We've got a couple here, but we're going to need more. So what do you recommend to a porn addict if he is seeking to gain maturity when a healthy male role model was missing in childhood?
That is a really good question. It's interesting to me. I've had some, I think probably in many ways it's out of my own wounds as well, but I've had a lot of curiosity around males and mentorship. I think I've recommended before, like the Hidden Brain podcast has a specific episode called The Lonely American Man. What do I recommend? Honestly, finding examples of maturity. So studying men who could be considered healthy role models, and to each person that can be different. But spending time around men who could be healthy role models. Sometimes if you look at the concept of 12-step, when we go to 12-step, we get a sponsor as a symbolic, like, father figure or mother figure for us, if that makes sense. We're looking for somebody who has been down this road before us and can help guide us through that process. So, looking for healthy role models, but I honestly think that can even be done in film, right? That can be in watching movies with healthy role models, in reading books with healthy role models. And they don't have to be, they can be fictional, right? Because what you're looking for are the traits of healthy maturity, and you're trying to figure out how to apply that in your own life. As silly as it sounds, it's been a little while since I've read it, but looking even at the Harry Potter series, where he didn't have a healthy role model until he got into Hogwarts and was able to put Dumbledore as that healthy male figure in his life. And in many ways, there was Hagrid as well, who was also a bit of a child, but was still a male role model, if that makes sense. And at the same time, you're seeing these healthy role models who are also making mistakes, right? Dumbledore making mistakes and maybe not treating Harry in certain ways. Like, it sounds silly, but to be honest, we can look for healthy role models all over, even in fictional material, and realize what are the traits. I like the fact that a role model can admit their mistakes. I like the fact that a role model can tell me they don't know the answer and they're trying to figure it out for themselves. So I think it's really about opening up their world to start looking for all the role models in movies and literature. It could be in 12-step, it could be at church, books of scripture. It could be reaching out to an uncle in this case that they've maybe looked up to but been afraid to talk to, and reaching out to them and saying, hey, can I call you? Can I ask you questions sometimes? Because I'm trying to explore how to improve and be healthier. Sometimes it's a good male therapist, if that makes sense, and that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some good ideas.
Yeah, and just to kind of, I have two things to add to that. Number one is, most addicts, we sort of stop growing emotionally as soon as we step into addiction, or when the addiction and the addictive behavior starts. We don't have to be full-blown addicts. I started my addictions, in middle school, and I was kind of an emotional middle schooler in my mid-30s when I got into recovery. And it wasn't pretty when I was like trying to navigate, human interactions. I just wasn't very good at it. I was still very narcissistic and self-centered, and didn't have a lot of skills because I never developed them. I avoided them.
It is interesting how many times in helping somebody recover, we start to realize, wow, this is the teenage boy, this is the teenage girl in you who needed to be angry but wasn't. And so your anger right now might be a little what would be seen as exaggerated, or you might have a little extra drama going on. And this is your time to now learn how to manage it. And so I think it's important for us to learn how to mentor ourselves, to where I can realize that the child in me is coming up and the adult in me can say, hey, kid, I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about this, right? Let's not be impulsive, and let's figure out a healthy way to go about this. So I think it's really important to do this to father self. In fact, looking back on my healing, the greatest mentor that I've had is my adult self, who has been able to calm the child in me that's hurt, but that takes time to even learn how to do.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. One of my pet peeves with American society, and really I think probably most of the world, is men are taught, we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We're on our own. Don't reach out to anybody. Don't be vulnerable with anybody. If you're ever going to be honest with anybody, maybe your wife, but you still need to keep some secrets from her. And I mean, this is what we're taught, and we certainly don't reach out to other males. And this is what Matt and I have talked about before, is this is incredibly harmful for us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we need connections with other males. I mean, I was very lucky when I got into recovery. I came to Palm Springs. I was new in recovery in Palm Springs, which is an older town. It's a retirement town. So there were a lot of these guys who were, 20, 30 years older than me, and long-term sobriety and enjoying life. And they were great mentors, and they were happy to step into that role. But, other places are different. It's harder to find somebody like that. And they understood somehow that it was okay to have male friends and to rely on them and to call them up and say, I'm having a terrible day. Can you talk to me?
Oh, and one of the biggest self-defeating mistakes I think we all make is we think, oh, well, other people can get their needs met with other men elsewhere, but not here, not in my town. And I've had friends of mine who I've pushed and said, I don't care how small of a town you live in, you can find other men who are needing and wanting connection. And worst case, you can at least find them through, the recovery groups that Sex and Relationship Healing has. You can make friends all over the world and other places. Like the limitation you have is within yourself. And so it's scary, though. We've got to put ourselves out there and ask other guys, the same goes for women, but asking other people, hey, would you be up for getting together and going paddleboarding? Would you be up for getting together and having a book club? Whatever it might be, you can get people together. Yeah. And you can create these opportunities to connect. But yes, it is especially difficult for men to recognize their need and reliance on other men. And it is a plague.
And then to do something about it. I mean, the real plague is we're afraid to do something about it. But there's always a men's group or something. I mean, most churches these days have a men's group, like a men's support group, just for guys to get together and talk. And
yeah. And I actually have another friend of mine who he was struggling with that, and he's been a faithful member of his faith for his whole life. And somebody he had just met invited him to a men's group at a totally different church. And he took the risk. It was a little scary because it's not his church or not his even his core values or belief system, at least in his mind. And he went because he wanted the friendship. He wanted the male connection. And so it takes a little bit of risk and vulnerability to make that happen. But I think it's really important. And whether it's a church or, I hate to say it, a bowling league or anything, just find some place where guys get together and hang out. For some reason, even in sports, we can touch each other in sports. We can slap each other on the butt. We can hug and celebrate a goal. But man, heaven forbid I walk into a room and say, hey, dude, I need a hug. Can you give me one?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay. All right. Next
men are
question.
funny.
I'm really struggling with doing my recovery, but my husband not doing his recovery for his sex addiction. He feels overwhelmed about it because he's 90 days sober from substance abuse, where he went to residential day treatment, and he's now finishing up intensive outpatient. But that treatment doesn't focus on sex addiction. His counselor is a CSAT, but doesn't address it because of insurance purposes. I find myself getting very frustrated about him not doing work. When he does some work, i.e. listening into podcasts, things like that, he's so good, but then he gets guilt, shame, etc., and doesn't address it. It's like he wants to ignore the education. What do I, as the betrayed partner, do? Because I can feel myself distancing.
Okay, so I'll address one thing really quickly. My guess is the CSAT doesn't address because of insurance purposes. That probably only has to do with a diagnosis, meaning there's no diagnostic code for sex addiction. Not yet, actually. Apparently, there's going to be one soon.
There is in the ICD, and some insurance will accept ICD codes so you can actually diagnose this. But
well, I don't think the official ICD-10 code actually comes out until January.
Yeah, 11 comes out in January. So, but but even then, most insurance companies want the DSM, which is the American version.
Right. And so we, like, for instance, I might have an addict who I diagnose with an adjustment disorder with anxiety, and then I draw a treatment plan up for that. And I mention sex addiction or potential sex addiction in there. And so just to throw that out there, just because you might have heard they're not addressing it because of insurance purposes, most likely they are focusing on it. I know that if you have you kind of have an order of treatment, that if somebody's coming out of treatment because of substance abuse, that's where you're going to focus first, because let's get the substance abuse and the stability in a good place, because that can be more life-threatening or potentially dangerous. And so that might be why that's happening. But it sounds like he has a lot of shame. I think because you mentioned that, I think what you're really asking is, what do I as the betrayed do? Because I feel myself distancing. And I think first and foremost, you need to be open that you feel yourself distancing. You need to just say, I'm scared because I can feel myself pulling away, because, and I'm just going to interpret what you're saying here, but I feel myself distancing because I'm scared. I'm not sure, are you really in recovery? And so I'm looking for these behaviors or traits so that I can feel safe enough to get vulnerable and open up. And so I think it's important for you to honor and vocalize the fact that you are distancing. So rather than, if you're being quiet and not saying much, then you need to say, hey, I'm feeling somber and quiet this morning, and I'm not saying much because I can feel myself distancing because I'm scared. And I'm nervous that maybe you're not doing recovery or taking it seriously. And I know that might trigger your shame. So try to vocalize it when you can. The other thing is, what you're doing is normal. Like, if we don't feel our partner doing their work, and we don't feel them taking the steps that we would want them to take, it's a pretty normal behavior to distance ourselves. So we have to, a lot of times, get our needs met by reaching out to friends and our support system, so that when our fear comes up, we're not letting it completely pull us away, because we're getting some of those needs met where we can, while also processing them with our partner. And by processing them with your partner, you might also say, I want to open up to you more. I want to be more vulnerable, but I'm worried if I open up to you, your shame is going to shut you down and you're going to pull away or you're going to act out. So I'm really nervous about being more vulnerable or close with you, because I don't want to trigger your addiction response. So this is a couple of approaches. The other thing is, lean into your recovery regardless. Make sure you're getting the support you need. You're doing your work. You're listening to the podcasts and reading the books and getting your needs met. You don't want to focus on his recovery so much that you lose sight and track of yours. So whether he does his recovery or not, you need to make sure that you're moving forward on yours and getting grounded. So just don't give up. Keep moving forward and getting your needs met. So hopefully that answers some of the questions there, but jump in here with more.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually jump off the question for a second and talk a little bit about cross and co-occurring addictions. Cross addictions are where I switch from one addiction to another. Co-occurring addiction is where I'm doing both addictions at the same time. I'm cross addicted. I'm an alcoholic, a drug addict, and a sex addict, and a porn addict, and I would switch from one to the other to the other. I'd feel bad about my sex and porn behavior, so I decide I'm going to stop that. I'm going to stop it, and then I would drink and drug. And then I'd feel bad about all the drinking and drugging. So I'd say, I'm going to stop this, I'm going to stop it. And then I would go back to the sex and porn. So I would kind of I would self-medicate the shame of one with the other. And then I would self-medicate the shame of that one with the other. Co-occurring is, I smoke pot and act out sexually at the same time, or I drink to alleviate my anxiety about picking people up at the singles bar or the swingers club or whatever it is I'm doing. Or I do meth to heighten the experience, the sexual experience, often in a group setting. That's a co-occurring addiction. They happen at the same time, and they can actually become fused over time. This is one of the things at Seeking Integrity that we actually treat is this fused drug and sex addiction. And basically nobody else does that. Almost every other facility does it the way Matt does it, which is let's treat the substance abuse first and hope the sex goes away, or we'll deal with it later. Neither of those things happens. And people will relapse on substances over their sexual behavior. Or if, like me, they went to treatment for sexual behavior first, they'll relapse on sexual behavior because they're still drinking the drug. So, I mean, we kind of strongly believe that these need to be treated together.
They're absolutely.
Or the other one will drag you out.
Yeah, and I don't, I'm with you. I don't disagree. And Seeking Integrity really does do a fantastic job with that. I will say that most clinicians aren't trained in both, right? And so the reason I won't treat drug addiction with sex addiction is I'm not trained in drug addiction. I can do some basic work and help just on an addiction nature. And so I will often get them the help they need with the drug addiction and then start working on the sex addiction. And so a lot of times that's why therapists take it in that order. But absolutely, if you can treat both at the same time or multiples at the same time, that is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And I'm also a big believer that you need to quit smoking and all that. Just get rid of all the addictions at once. If you're going to go through withdrawal, do it once.
Right.
So yeah, if you want to find out more about that, email us at Seeking Integrity. We can talk about that at length if you'd like. How do you know what are healthy thoughts? High sex drive versus addiction, if it's normal or not. Would taking the sex addiction courses help with that differentiation?
Okay, so at first you read this, how do you know what's healthy socks? And I thought all socks are healthy. Anyway, I thought I'm funny. Okay, this is actually, I think, a really great thing to explore. How do you know what healthy thoughts are, if it's a high sex drive versus an addiction? Well, the reality of it is and if it's normal or not. And there's I think she's a sex therapist, but one of the researchers who I actually really enjoy, her name is Emily Nagoski. She wrote a book called Come As You Are, which is the new science of female sexual arousal, if I remember correctly. That's kind of the full title. And I love this book. In fact, it taught me a lot about my own sexuality, even though it's on female sexuality, and it just puts things in a way that really helped me understand certain things really well. And one of the things that I love about it is she says, if you think it's normal. And it's normalizing the fact that almost like, what good does it do if I were to say to somebody, that's not normal, right? It's really more like the first question, how do you know it's healthy? Well, the reality of it is, if I have a sexual thought or desire that goes against the belief systems of my marriage, of my partnership, and it leaves my partner feeling betrayed, then it's not healthy, right? What is it not healthy for? It's not healthy for our relationship. If I have a thought that goes against my moral belief system, right, then I have to go, is that healthy for me? I don't know. If it's bringing up a lot of shame, then I need to figure out what needs to happen there. Sometimes it's, hey, you know what, that thought comes up. It's not going to take me to good places, but I'm not going to shame myself for having that thought. And so how do I move myself off of that thought and onto something else? And so it's this realization that there's no sense in shaming ourselves for thoughts or feelings or desires that we have, rather than moving it and saying, hey, is that going to work? Does that work in my marriage? No, it doesn't. Okay. So I'm going to check it in. I'm going to be honest about it. I'm going to talk to my, sponsor or whoever else and be open about it. But I think, as far as high sex drive versus addiction, that's one of the things I always try and be careful with, because people have this myth that like high sex drive is where addiction comes from. And that's actually just absurd.
Sex addiction is not about sex. It's about escape.
Right. One part of it is about
not want to escape, or I can have a low sex drive, but still use sex as an escape.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of sex addicts who have a really low sex drive because they've moved themselves into sexual anorexia. And so they're completely void of sex, which is part of the addiction cycle for them. So yeah, I guess I'm just trying to throw out there, like, and as far as taking the sex addiction courses be helpful with that differentiation, it depends. Like, I think the more that we learn about sex addiction, the more that we learn about sexuality, can help all of that, right? Because we start to explore, like Emily Nagoski's book. She talks a lot about, like, there's a lot of things in her book that I don't agree with for me. Like, they just don't fit for me, but I can totally see with one of my clients, it totally could fit. So I read the book and I go, hey, that fits for me. I like that. That doesn't fit for me. That doesn't really apply. And so we have to learn and study and try to and talk to other people about these things so that we can understand ourselves well enough to figure out what works, what's healthy, what's not. And we've got to figure that out. We've got to talk to our spouse about it. It's a terrifying thing to go to our spouse and start talking about our own sexuality. The number of sexuality as a couple, I should say, the number of couples that don't even talk about sex, don't even talk about what they like or don't like sexually as a couple. It's amazing to me how little communication happens in the bedroom or outside of the bedroom about the bedroom. It's like, so all of that can help us work through it. All of that can help us figure out, where did we develop our shame around sexuality? Where did we develop our introduction, our ideas? So many addicts got introduced to porn and they've developed sexual attitudes and beliefs and behaviors around porn that are horrible. And they need to be able to work through that, talk through that, so that they can figure out what actually is healthy within the relationship and what's not. And a lot of betrayed partners will come into my office and say, I don't ever want to do this sexually because he or she learned that from porn. And it's like, okay, well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but just because it was learned from porn doesn't mean it doesn't have a healthy place within your sex life. So we've got to figure out over time how to introduce and work through the sexuality as a couple to figure out what's healthy for the couple. So all of this needs to be done. It doesn't happen within 90 days of discovery. It doesn't happen within 6 months. Like, I mean, it could, but typically this is an ongoing process. Just like you're reclaiming your sexuality as a couple, it's going to take time. So ask me more specific questions, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and CSATs don't judge the sexual behavior that anybody walks in with. A sex addiction therapist doesn't judge your sexual behavior. What they try to help you with is the compulsive nature and the escapist nature of the sexual behavior and the damage that the compulsivity is creating in your life. You can have a kink, and a fetish and practice it and be sexually sober. You can have a polyamorous relationship and be sexually sober. You can be gay or straight or bi or anything in between and be sexually sober. It doesn't have anything to do with what's turning us on or what we're into. It's about, have we lost control over it, and is it destroying our lives?
Right. And have we lost control, and is it just destroying our relationship? Right. Like, so it's an interesting place to try and teach people that I can't judge what works for you in your sexual behavior, but I can very quickly figure out what's not working for you by the level of distress that you're bringing to me. And so for me personally, people will ask me questions. Well, is this okay sexually within my addiction? And there are some people I've talked to where I say, for you, based on what happens, masturbation's off the table. You can't do it. There is never a place for it for you. Right. And there are other people where within their marriage and their relationship and in working with their therapist, they can figure out a place where that can actually be acceptable. But I will tell you this, it's never hiding. It's never secrecy. There's never lying. Right. There is no place for lying in the relationship ever. Right. And so that's where we start to understand these bigger concepts, although they can be very daunting, are really important to understand. Like, it's not about a certain sex act or behavior.
Yeah, and as far as taking the sex addiction courses, I assume you're talking about the courses through Seeking Integrity. I'm a big fan, but of course I wrote them and I teach a lot of them, so I'm a big fan.
I've heard good things as well.
Thank you. We do psychoeducation. It's all educational. It's not what you would do if you went into Matt's office. It's something you do in addition to going into Matt's office, because Matt he does therapy. He'll help you work through issues. He'll help you, peel back the layers and process things.
Ask questions and dig stuff out.
Yeah.
Whereas when you do like a course like that, it's education and we're discussing it as a group, but we're not you're typically not going to dive into the heavy recesses of the soul to try and figure out how things had been developed.
Yeah, I think actually doing like the online work groups is great if you have a good CSAT that you're working with in person. And I think having a good CSAT is a flat out necessity, period. So yeah, I'm recommending, call me. We'll talk. Is there a good book on parenting ourselves for men and also women, because they can be taught to be tough too? Eddie Caparucci's book, Going Deeper, which is about inner child work. I'll dig up the link for that and pop it in the chat feature. Matt may have some suggestions too.
No, that's good. The other one that immediately popped into my head, and to be honest with you, I'm trying to think, I don't even know if I've read it all the way through. But you might try, John Bradshaw had a book. Oh gosh, it's going to kill me. I can't remember the name of it, but it's all about parenting the inner self or parenting the child. But I think if you even do a search like parenting inner child book, you'd be amazed at what's out there. Like, I'm sure there's quite a bit. But off the top of my head, like, I'm not immediately, other than that John Bradshaw book, is anything popping in.
Yeah, the Homecoming, Reclaiming and Healing Your Inner Child. That one.
That's it. Yep, Homecoming. I couldn't remember.
We'll pop that in the chat feature as well.
And keep in mind, anytime you read these books or anytime I recommend a book, sometimes people, it's kind of a funny thing. Like, as a clinician, if I read a book, I'm telling somebody, hey, there's a lot of good information in here that will likely help you. Go dig it out. And there's a book I'll say this on here because we had somebody asking about male mentoring. There's a book for men who are like persistent nice guys, always trying to be the nice guy, never trying to stir up conflict. Oftentimes they lie to their wives because they don't ever want to make any waves, and they always want to be the nice guy. And there's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. And or there's another book called Not Nice, but this one's for men and women by Aziz Ghazipura. And those, like, when you read a book like these, you have to realize that there's stuff in it I don't agree with. Like, because it's one person who's done their research or written this book or had their experience. And so you've got to go through and figure out what applies and what doesn't apply. I find it interesting when somebody comes back and they say to me, I can't believe you recommended this book. It has this in it, and my spouse told me that you recommended it, and therefore they had to follow it. And I'm thinking, that sounds like a sack of garbage, because I'm recommending something, but go find the good and figure out how to apply it for good in your relationship. So when we're recommending these books, there might be some outdated information. There might be, something that doesn't apply to you or that you're thoroughly offended by. Well, pass by it and go find the good and figure out how to apply the good for yourselves. So
and that goes for 12-step meetings, webinars, drop-in groups, any support group. Take what applies to you and leave the rest. I mean, I've been to 12-step meetings. I have heard some of the craziest shit ever in a 12-step meeting. And I'm like, you are out of your mind.
Oh, totally.
But,
I mean, it is interesting. So anyway, I throw that out there as a reminder, and I'm answering questions here. Sometimes I answer questions from the perspective I'm currently sitting in and with what information I'm interpreting from the question itself, that I could be totally wrong. And so take it for what it's worth. We're doing, and try to find the good. And man, that's why I always tell people, like, I think I answered that, but ask more questions. So
I'm going to pull this one out of the chat feature. Can lying and gaslighting behavior that's existed all of my 65-year-old sex addict's life be overcome, or is it too ingrained?
Well, here's the hardest thing. I am an absolute believer in there is no such thing as too late, right? There's no such thing as too far gone. Now, there are questions of how much work can reasonably done and how fast can it be done, and what other limitations might we have. Like, sometimes I've worked with people with personality disorders, and our current understanding of personality disorders is that they can't fully be healed, as in they would be completely void of that personality disorder moving forward. So it's a really hard question to answer. In a normal sample of the population, would I say, could it be overcome? Absolutely. In your particular circumstance, maybe not, right? Like, sometimes it takes me a year or 2 or 3. I had a client at one point who recently came to me and said, I think I might be a narcissist. And it was interesting because that comment alone allowed us to open up and have a dialogue about potential limitations that might be going on that we couldn't have ever had, at least not in my opinion. So we have to kind of look and go, like, yes, it's possible it's too ingrained. Yes, it's possible that it can't be overcome. I don't know that I personally like living in that realm. Like, to me, if I see a possibility that this can be overcome, that our relationship can become stronger, that we can find healing, well, then I'm going to push in that direction. So, yep, it's possible, but that would not be the mental thought process I would take. I would definitely push in the way of, hey, let's fight this thing. Somebody could tell me that my wife has stage 4 cancer and it's not curable. And I'm going to say, okay, great. Thank you for telling me that. Now let's fight and see what we can do to find the healing that we can find here, because I love them so much that I don't want to say that there's zero chance. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think somebody, even people with like narcissistic, like with personality disorders, like narcissistic personality disorder, which is deeply ingrained and difficult to treat, I think you would admit.
Absolutely.
But they can make progress.
Right.
If they want to.
Even if it's just behavioral progress, even if it is just logical behavioral changes, and their heart and mind haven't necessarily changed, but they know that it's best for them to change, and so they almost robotically have learned to make these changes, that is still change, and it still makes things better.
Yeah, I mean, I can be a narcissist, and I can realize when I treat people this way, they don't like it.
Right.
And they get mad.
And I don't get what I want either.
And I don't, yeah, and it hurts me too. So I learn to not behave that way.
Totally.
I'm still a narcissist, but yeah, and lying and gaslighting is so common with all addicts, really. We're expert liars, and if we have a partner, we tend to gaslight. And we don't all have deep personality disorders.
Oh, totally.
Fairly normal. So
yeah.
Yes, we can absolutely stop lying.
Right.
The vast majority, I would say. So
okay, so I do need to wrap up. I'm on a weird deadline today, so I think that covers it.
We good? Yeah, we're good. Somebody asked, what is your take on Dr. Minwala's work? I will say, take what you like and leave the rest. And I won't get specific about that. And I don't know thoughts on Omar.
And then there was another question: is it possible for manipulative behaviors to be addiction? I would say no. Manipulative behaviors accompany addiction. I don't know that there's any evidence that says that manipulation is triggering some type of chemical in the brain that you can become addicted to, or that sort of thing. Can it become habitual? Absolutely. In and of itself being addiction, I would say no, but at the same time, it's awful and terrible. And it may be a coping strategy that they struggle to give up, but absolutely, it's painful for relationships and needs to be healed, and it needs to be done away with, whether we label it as an addiction or not.
Yeah.
So I think that covers
addiction. Yeah, Matt's got to go. One element of addictive behaviors is and substances is they need to create some element of pleasure, that dopamine adrenaline rush we get. I don't know that manipulation does that, but it certainly accompanies addiction.
Oh yeah, and it's not okay no matter what.
Not cool. All right, Matt,
okay.
Thank you. Everybody, will see you in 2 weeks. Hasta la vista. And reach out if you need to.
See you guys.